Hello YouTube Pipers. It's been a while since I've been on here, and I decided I was going to smoke my Savinelli Roma 673 today. That's this one. And I put velvet in it that's been in a jar back there since 4/20/23. So it's almost a year that's been sitting back there. It smelled good, and we'll see how it tastes. It's been a while since I've smoked a shorty. This one's been back in the back for quite some time now. I have a Savinelli filter in here, and yet I'm still getting those little crumbs of tobacco caught in my teeth. That's the first time I haven't been able to keep it lit. Well, yesterday, if I had remained married, would have been, gosh, I think I figured it out to be 55th anniversary. But my marriage only lasted 13 years. And on top of that, my ex passed away about 4 years ago. So that was one date in April. Tomorrow is the 13th of April, and that would have been my dad's 106th birthday if he had still been around. And on Monday is my grandson's birthday. And you know, I'm not sure what year he was born, so I'm not quite sure how old he is. 12 perhaps. Not quite a teenager. Oh, I have a beverage, as they say in the show, and it's a combination of this and this. I like to mix those. The Guinness is called stout for a reason. It's almost syrupy on its own. And on its own, it just puts me to sleep after about 30 minutes. But when I mix them like that, it's not quite as heavy a drink. And it doesn't tend to put me asleep. I might have packed this a little too tight. My dad was born April 13th, 1918, in a little town called Little Mungum. It's a small town in Kent, the county of Kent of England. So he was born right after the Great War, or as we call it now, the World War One. And grew up just in time for World War II. He didn't have the happiest of childhoods. One of the things back in those, I don't know if they still do it or not, I think they do. But about springtime, I think it's springtime, might have been fall, I don't know. I'm not up on these things. Excuse me. They would go to the park that had hickory trees in it and throw sticks up into the limbs to knock down the pods to get these horse chestnuts. And my dad went out there when the season came and knocked himself one out of the tree that he knew was going to be his championship conker. They called them Conquerors, Conker. But he had to drill a hole in it and put a string through it. And he was already, when he did it this particular time, he was already late because he was supposed to be with his dad in his workshop mending boots, which is what my granddad did back in those days. And I guess my dad would have been about the age that my grandson is now, between 12 and 13. At this particular time that I'm talking about now, he told me stories about his childhood. And in my mind, this is how those stories came about in my head. What he told me may have been a lot different from what I understood and what my brain has caused to come into the story that I'm about to give to you now. But after he got the hickory nut or the horse chestnut, whatever they are, he told his friends that he had himself the best that he had ever gotten, but he had to leave, and so he ran all the way home. And started walking up to the shed where his dad would be, and looked in and didn't see him, so he thought maybe he could get in there without it being known that he was late. And as he walked in, he didn't see his dad in there, but when he walked in, he got this hand up the back of his head. Whop! And a voice said, "Where have you been? You're late." And my dad rubbed the back of his head and said he was sorry he was late, but he had to find his conquer for that year. And his dad, upset because he was playing and not working, raised his hand in order to smack the back of his head again, but Dad went over to the last, that's where you put the boot, the last. It's like the outline of a sole made of iron that stands up to hold the shoe steady when you're putting a sole on it. And asked his dad where's the one he wanted him to fix. So his dad gave him the boot and gave him the leather for the sole. And Dad measured the sole, put the outline on it, and cut the waist away from what was going on the shoe. Got the tacks he needed, put them in his mouth, and pulled them out one at a time to tap them in there to hold the leather sole on once it was completed. He took his time and he got the best he could, and he gave it to his dad, my granddad, and asked him what he thought. Granddad looked it over, and he was really amazed at how well this boy was doing this job that he had been doing for years, and he almost surpassed him in what he was doing. And the final shoe, the final workmanship, but he never really said anything to my dad. He just looked at him, marveled, and said, "Good job," but he never really praised him. Dad didn't really need the praise because he knew what he could do, and he always did it his best. And his dad threw the boot in there was a bin where they put when they finished soling them, tossed it in there and gave him the other of the pair and let him finish that one too. Finished that one much faster than the first. And once again, his dad looked at it and marveled at what this boy could do. And Dad asked him if he had more or could he go and join his mates. And he said, "You can play whenever we've finished. There's a lot more to be done here. You need to polish those that are in the bin. You need to prepare those for new soles, rip off the old. And when we've finished for the day, if it's still light out, you can go meet your mates." Well, in preparation to get these soles done, he had put his cap and coat over to the side and had put his hickory nut or horse chestnut, whatever it was, his conker, I'm just going to call it his conker, in his cap and put them to the side where they'd be safe. And they worked all day. He soled boots, meaning he put soles on the boots, not that he sold boots. Put on heels, got them out of the bin once they were finished and polished them to a bright shine. And when they finished for the day, it was dark out, so he wasn't able to go join his mates. But when he grabbed his cap, he had forgotten his conker was in there, and he flipped it up, and the conker went out and slammed on the concrete floor and broke. Well, he knew that one would never have been a good one anyway. So he told himself he'd get up early and run down there to the park and find another and get back before his dad needed him. Which he did early in the morning. He got up, ran down there, had his stick with him, and threw it up in the branches. In about 30 minutes, he had another great specimen. It had a real weight to it, and he was real pleased with this. But he still needed to get it home and drill a hole through it and get that string through it. So he ran back to his house with the Conqueror in his pocket this time, so he wouldn't accidentally fling it out of his cap. I can't seem to keep this thing lit. And he had another day of mending boots. That went on for 2 days. And his dad told him about midway through the second day that he could go meet with his mates and see what he could do with his Conqueror. So he drilled a hole in his, put the string through, and tied it up. And twirled it and made sure that it was a good knot and put it in his pocket and ran down to the park. And as he got there, one of his mates said, "Oh, bloody hell." And he heard a crack. And his mate's Conqueror was on the ground, cracked in half. And this guy that he didn't know was there, and he said, "Well, that makes that a tenner," meaning that he had broken the Conquerors of 10 people. You put that on a Conqueror. If it consistently broke other people's, then each time you did, you would say it's a oneer, it's a twoer, it's a threer. And if the one you cracked had already cracked 3 others, you added those 3 to whatever it was, so that if yours was a 5er and you broke one that had been a 3er, yours would now be an 8er. I think that's right. Well, you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. But anyway, my dad walked up and said, "How do I know yours is a tenner?" And the guy turned around and said, "You calling me a liar?" He said, "Well, I don't know you. I'm just asking you. How do I know that yours is a tenner?" He said, "I wouldn't want to match mine against you and break yours and call mine an 11er when I don't know for a fact that yours is a tenner." He said, "Well, I said it was." He said, "That's not proof for me." So the guy threw his Conqueror on the ground and took a swing at Dad, and Dad ducked. And he put his right hand in his middle, which doubled him over, and Dad was left-handed, and he came down on him with his left hand, and the fella just fell on the ground and his eyes rolled back in his head. And his buddy said, "Oh, you've done it now." And Dad said, He's all right. He's just knocked out." He said, "I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that." And he pointed behind him. And it was his mother coming straight for him. She had red in her eyes. She was angry with him. And he said, "Uh-oh." And he put his Conqueror in his pocket. And she came up to him and grabbed him by the ear. And she said, "You know how I feel about you fighting." She said, "I told you I don't want you doing that. And I don't want to see it again. Do you understand?" And she took him all the way home, bending his ear so that he was in pain all the way. Poor Dad. She got him home, put him in the living room, and said, "You bend over that couch while I go find a switch." Well, he was a very obedient boy. He knew better than to make her more angry than she was. And she came back, she had a dowel in her hand, one of those round, hard rods. And she just hauled back. He was bent over that couch. She hauled back and smacked his rear end. He jumped but didn't say a word, because if he said anything or made a noise, it would get even worse. But the tears just popped out of his eyes from that, and she had 9 more of those. Whack! And after 9, he was sniffling, and tears were just, but he never made a sound. One time he made the mistake of laughing at her when she did that. He was truly sorry then. At any rate, she said, "I want you to remember what I said about you fighting. I don't want you fighting. Do you understand me?" And through sniffles, he said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "I want you to think on that." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Now get out there and help your dad." He said, "We're already through for the day." She said, "Well, get out of my sight." So he went to his room, fell on his bed, and fell asleep. Came down the next morning and was fixing to go over to, because this was a day off, and he was fixing to go back to the park to meet his mates and try out this new Conqueror, when he walked out, and in the street in front of his house was that boy he had KO'd in the park with 3 of his buddies. And as he walked up to them and they began to threaten him, he heard this knock on the window. Pap, 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 pap. And he turned around, and it was his mother going. She did not want him fighting, period. So they laid into him, and they let him have it. He was knocked out. 4 boys against 1. And he woke up in his bedroom, and his dad was there and said, "Boy, I want you to get up. I want you to come down to the living room because I want to talk to you." Poor Dad. Obediently, he got up, went down to the living room, and as he got there, his dad popped him in the jaw, knocked him up in the air and across the couch and on the floor. And as he got up, his dad said, "I saw you outside. I saw you outside yesterday when those boys beat you up and you never lifted a hand." My poor Dad. And Dad said, he said, "I don't want any buts from you. I have told you how to take care of yourself, and I expect you, whenever you're threatened like that, to take care of yourself. Don't just take a whipping." And he said, "All right, come on, we're going down to the park." And so he walked him down to the park. And as he got there, he said, "Are those the boys that beat you up yesterday?" Dad said, yes, sir, they are. He said, you know what I want you to do. Dad said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, well, go do it. So Dad walked up to those guys, and all four of them were doing their conquer thing, and one of them said, hey, look, the sissy's coming up, the guy who wouldn't lift a finger yesterday when we beat the heck out of him. My dad got there and stood his ground. He was shorter than these guys by a couple of inches. Dad was always short all his life. And he said, I've come here to make that right. He said, I'll take you on one at a time. They looked at him and laughed, and the big guy walked over there and took a swing at him, and Dad ducked, right hand into his stomach, left hand across his jaw, and he was out on the ground. And he said, next. The next one came over there and was about to swing, and Dad just put a left across his face. Bam! And he was out on the ground. And he looked at the other two and he said, next. And the other two looked at each other and ran at him, fists flying. Dad ducked down, put his right hand into the gut of the first one, and he bent over and he went to the next one and right hand across his face, which knocked him away. And he came back with a left on the other guy and knocked him to the ground. And he lay there and didn't get up. The one he had smacked over here looked at the three on the ground, looked at my dad, and ran. And the other three didn't bother him again. Not a mark on him. And he walked over to his dad and he said, did I do all right? And he said, yes, son, that's exactly what I want you to do anytime somebody threatens you. His dad made sure that his mother was not around to see that, because he knew what she had said. Two conflicting things here in my dad's head. Anyway, they went back to the house and started mending boots again, and his dad said, tomorrow's boot fair day, and I'm going to take these to the fair. You want to go with me? And Dad said, no, I think I'm going to stick around the house. Maybe go play Conquerors with my mates. And my granddad told him, okay. And he said, I'm proud of you, what you did out there, and that's what I want you to always do. Well, my dad looked at him and said, yes, sir. And the next morning, Granddad had the boots and put them all in the car and took off for the boot fair. Grandmother went with him. And Dad went into the workshop, looked at his conker to make sure that it was tight and everything was right, and he put that in his pocket in case he had to do anything to it. And then he looked around the shelves and he saw some paraffin over there, and he picked it up off the shelf. And he poured it all over the shelves and all over the workbench and poured a trail out through the door. And he had matches in his pocket, and he struck a match, let it get full lit, and put it to that trail of paraffin. Of course, he had put the cap on the paraffin and put it back. And that lit up, followed the trail into the wood workshop, and the workshop just caught on fire. Dad closed the door, looked around to make sure the neighbors weren't looking, and snuck off to the park. Now, his dad and mother were at the boot fair. So that by the time they got home, that workshop was nothing but cinders. But that whole time, Dad was down at the park getting a reputation with this new Conqueror he had. He had already proved that it was a tenor already. And somebody came up to him and said, "I want to make mine an 11er. You ready to go?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I think I'm on fire today." His dad never did figure out that my dad had set light to his workshop. But I think in his own mind, he was just getting them back for what they had done to him. He had a rough life. A rough life. Those two opposing points of view always bearing down on him. He had 3 sisters, so that made 4 women in the house and 2 men. It was hard times for him. I think as soon as he was 18, he got a job in the coal mines. And he was working in the coal mines when they declared war. And that was an occupation. If you were a coal miner, you didn't have to go to war. You didn't have to join the military. But he felt it was his obligation, and he joined the Navy. Because he did not want to carry a gun, and he did not want to have to shoot the enemy. And he figured being down in the bowels of a ship in the middle of the ocean he would not have to kill anyone. And that's where he was during the war. Of course, he was wrong about them not finding them in the middle of the ocean, because he had 3 ships that he was on that were all hit while he was on them. One of them, I think it was the first ship he was on, was cut in half by the Queen Mary as it was bringing troops from America. I think Dad was sent to another ship in August, and I think it was in October that that ship that he had been on was cut in half by the Queen Mary, and practically everybody drowned. So, kind of amazing. Yeah. Dad would have been 106. He was born on the 13th. He joined the military on the 13th. And he died on the 13th. He always said the 13th, or the number 13, played a big role in his life. I miss him. I would be happy to hold the light, as I always did when he worked on the car. Hold the light. Over here, son. I didn't feel like I contributed much, but I would be happy to be able to do that again. Or just sit on the step out here and have a cup of tea with him. We didn't talk much, but I still miss him. Sorry I took up so much of your time. I didn't realize I was going on and on. Sometimes I can't quite make it through. But I appreciate y'all listening. For those of you whose dads are still here, enjoy them. For those of you who are in my boat and your dad has been gone for a while, think back on the good times that you had together. All right. I appreciate you listening. Appreciate you spending the time with me. Those of you who stayed through the whole thing, that's a long time to stay, and I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I miss talking to you. I just don't seem to have a whole lot to say these days, but I'll try to get better at it. Y'all be good. Take care of yourselves. God bless you. Till the next time. Bye-bye.